Welcome back to the Means Report. Thank you for staying with us, and thanks again to Brian Evans for stopping by from Platt's Funeral Home to talk about some end-of-life issues that you don't have to wait until the end of life to discuss. They've been in the business for well over a century, and so we appreciate him bringing that experience to the table. Also, when it comes to experience, you'll find no better than our next guest. He's Jim Trotter. He's a local attorney, and Jim is going to talk to us about a couple of more issues that you or your loved ones may have to deal with, especially when it comes to important decision-making, decisions that may have to be made during a time of crisis, that may have to be made during a time when someone is medically incapable of making their own decisions. And so legally, we want to find out what can be done to make that whole process a little smoother, just as we did with the funeral process. And so Jim from Trotter and Jones, thank you so much for being with us today. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Brad, for having me.
Yes, sir. Let's first of all talk about some things that have changed. I've always heard that you have to have a living will, and that it's good to have, and I don't know if I'm saying this correctly, but I know there's power of attorney and medical power of attorney. You know, if you have all that paperwork in order, then you're going to be just fine should you have to make a decision for a loved one or or vice versa. But that's changed in recent years, correct?
It's been simplified, actually.
Yeah.
In 2007, the Georgia's legislature came up with a new document that's called an Advanced Directive for Healthcare. And that document combines both the living will and the durable power of attorney for healthcare.
Right.
And it does several things. The first thing that you do with that document is appoint a healthcare agent to make decisions, medical decisions for you in the event you can't make them for yourself. You can name that agent, you can name a backup agent in the event that the primary agent cannot serve. And that healthcare agent has all the same powers that you would have yourself to admit you to a hospital, sign for procedures, and make critical decisions regarding your medical care, all in the event that you can't do it yourself. Is
this usually a family member, this agent, or is it usually an attorney like you? Who should we choose?
Actually, it's normally a family member.
Yeah.
And most people pick a spouse or a child or someone they trust to help make those medical decisions. And the second part of the document replaces the old living will.
Okay.
And that second part contains treatment preferences. And it's set up by the legislature almost in a multiple choice format. The first selection is in what type of condition you want this document, these choices to apply. And there's two to choose from, and you can pick one or both. And it's a terminal condition, which means that in your current condition, you're expected to die in a relatively short period of time with no hope for cure. And the other one is a state of permanent unconsciousness. You may not die anytime soon, but you will be incapacitated and no hope for any change in that condition. So most people in making these decisions select both of those states.
Okay.
And then they make a choice about what type of care they want. And it's really broken down very clearly in the document. It ranges from do everything you can to keep me alive no matter what, as long as you can, no matter the cost, to don't do anything. Just keep me comfortable and allow my natural death to occur. And then there's some middle choices where you can make a choice, I don't want any extraordinary medical efforts made to keep me alive, but I do want food, water, pain medication, things like that.
The skeptic in me says, even if you've dotted all your I's and crossed all your T's, that you would still find a document like the one you're describing, or documents open to challenge. That is to say, a family member could still step forward, couldn't they, and say, guess what? Define permanent state of unconsciousness, because I think he or she's going to come out of it one day. Therefore, this is really what they meant when they drew this up. Can't things still be challenged, or is there an ironclad document that'll take care of you when you can't take care of yourself?
Things can always be challenged. That's the attorney in me speaking. But the decision about what type of state you're in is really up to the doctor.
All right.
And a doctor has to, if there's a disagreement amongst the family, it's a doctor's decision as to if they are in the state of permanent unconsciousness as it's defined in the law, or a terminal condition as it's defined in the law. And so the final decision is really going to rest with the doctor.
I know that you mentioned this change coming in 2007. That wasn't too long, is that correct? It was 07.
Right.
Not too long after the Terry Schiavo case, which I think ended in 2005. And you're talking about 7 years of appeals, 14 appeals all told, when a woman was on life support. Her husband wanted to disconnect the feeding tube. Her family did not. The state of Florida got involved. Are all of the things you've discussed ways to avoid things like that in the future?
Exactly. The legislature of the state of Georgia reacted to that Terry Schiavo event in Florida and tried to simplify the process. The form is easy to read. It's a form widely available to anyone on the internet. You can find it anywhere. We only recommend that you have an attorney go over it with you if you have any questions. And it's also got to be witnessed properly. It has to have 2 witnesses. Those witnesses cannot be anyone who knowingly is going to inherit anything from the person executing the document. And a treating physician can't be a witness. One of the 2 witnesses can be an employee or agent of the hospital or facility where the person is at the time. But to make it effective, it's got to be witnessed and executed properly. And an attorney can help answer any questions regarding the document as well.
All right, you kind of got into my next area of questions, which has to do with who gets to be involved in the planning of these documents, besides obviously the person who's going to be in that hospital bed one day. But how do you make sure that perhaps the executor and the witnesses are not all in cahoots?
Well, typically we meet with husbands and wives, with spouses who are planning this together, and they're appointing each other as their agents for healthcare.
Okay.
But I'd see it when it's executed and everybody's happy.
Right.
When things are happening in the hospital, we don't always hear about it, and there can be disagreements. But again, that's why the form is drafted the way it is, to make sure that the wishes of the one executing it are carried out. And if it's done properly, then the hospitals recognize that, and the medical providers recognize that, and they carry it out because they have to. It
sort of, as Brian was mentioning with funeral planning, takes all the emotion out of it, doesn't it?
Exactly.
It's just a clear-cut decision. It's in black and white. Let me ask you a question about age and when people should start thinking about these documents. I know that shortly after we got married, someone said you need to have a will. All right, but when do you go to the next level with living wills and with, with the Advanced Directive for Healthcare and the other documents that you've discussed? Is there a minimum age where we should inquire and come see you?
There's not a minimum age at all. You need to be 18 to execute one. But really, anytime you're going into the hospital for a surgery or procedure, at check-in a lot of times, they'll ask you, do you have one? And it's kind of scary when you say, well, what is it? And no. So anyone at any age can execute it. When they are going to have any sort of procedure in which the hospital's asking you if you have it. You probably need one at that time. The other important document to have is a durable power of attorney for property.
Durable power of attorney for property.
Right.
All right, what's that do?
That's what we also call it, a financial power of attorney. It allows your agent or agents, you can name more than one, to take all sorts of steps on your behalf to maintain your checking accounts, pay your bills, buy and sell property, take care of investment accounts, all sorts of things to run the financial side of your life, again, in the event that you're unable to do so yourself or out of the country, away, and certain things need to happen. And so these 2 documents really work together to help make sure that not just your medical decisions are taken care of, but financial decisions can be taken care of in the event that you can't do it yourself.
If you don't have any legal paperwork directing your medical decisions, can your treatment be affected, or have you ever heard cases where treatment changed because that paperwork wasn't there?
That's a better question for a doctor, but my understanding is the doctors all take the Hippocratic Oath, and unless there's a document telling them to allow a natural death to occur, don't take any steps to prolong my life, then the doctors are going to do everything they can within reason to prolong your life and do everything they can to keep you alive and to treat you as best they can.
What about, you don't have to give an exact cost, but should cost be something we fear when we're planning this, especially for younger people watching who say, I love what Mr. Trotter's saying, I want to do this, I want to talk to my mom or dad about it tonight. Is it super expensive?
It's not expensive at all. Yeah. Again, these forms are forms that are available to anyone. Attorneys use the same form for the Advanced Directive that is found on the internet because we have to. It's set by the legislature. But you're looking at only probably a few $100s to get both of these documents executed, and then additional costs to plan with wills. And a will is really good for anyone once you get married, especially once you have children. It's time to put a will together and outline not just how your assets are distributed, but more importantly, if something were to happen to you and your spouse, who's going to care for your children? Those are the difficult questions that it's best to answer when you're living and when there's no emotion in it.
What words of advice or words of caution perhaps might you have for people who say, oh, okay, I've heard what Mr. Trotter said, I'll just do all of that on the internet and I'll print those documents out myself and sign them and get them notarized? Well,
again, you've got to make sure that they're executed properly, and if they're not, they're no good. And that's when an attorney can ensure is that they are executed so that they can't be challenged. And again, there are choices to be made in this advanced directive. You don't just print it up and sign it. And it's relatively easy to follow, but if you have any questions at all, you do need an attorney or maybe a healthcare provider to help answer those questions for you.
Right. And is it possible to take, you mentioned the multiple choice options, is it possible to add your own choices or pencil things in as long as all parties agree if you're in the presence of an attorney and working with a real person?
Probably not. The legislature has set this form and said that for it to be effective, it's got to have all of these parts.
All right.
And it really covers just about every situation you can imagine, and I can't imagine a need to really change the form.
If you lock everything down in Georgia and take every piece of advice you've given us today and you move to another state, what does that do?
My understanding is generally these will be recognized in other states. I think other states have taken steps to, again, in reaction to the Terry Schiavo event in Florida, to formalize and normalize this process, and that these documents can be recognized. But again, if you go to South Carolina or any other state, you should look and see if this form is still valid there or if you need to get a new one. Okay, so just check with an attorney there or check with your Georgia attorney as you're moving to make sure you're set. It is a lot of ground to cover, and we've done our best to cover as much as we could in 12 minutes. Did I leave anything out? Is there any important information, or did we cover the general things you need to know? I think we covered about everything, but what everybody needs to recognize, and I have a lot of people ask me this, once you die, these documents don't have any effect anymore. The power of attorney especially is over as soon as that person dies, and that's when you need a will or other document that can take care of your affairs after your death. Okay, probably the best point of all, this doesn't supersede your will, this is just getting you to that point of death. That's right. And then the other documents would kick in. That's right. Thank you for everything. Thanks, Brad. I appreciate it. Jim Trotter, Trotter and Jones, go see him just as you need to go see Brian and tackle these issues now when you can do it, when emotion is not involved, as both gentlemen have said. When we come back, our question of the week, dealing with those crazy names that have been submitted for the new ASU GHSU school. Which ones do you like? Will your grandchildren graduate from Noble University one day? We'll get your thoughts and wrap up this edition of the Means Report next.